I only noticed it because the pen was recent. Most bathroom graffiti has that weathered look, ink faded into the paint, edges soft, written by someone who no longer exists in quite the same form as when they wrote it. This was different. Sharp black ink, clean lines, written at eye level on the back of the stall door in careful block letters. A phone number. And below it, in the same hand, "She doesn't know yet." It took me a moment to realize it was my number. You'd think you'd know immediately, but there's a delay, some cognitive kindness that buffers the brain from the worst interpretations. I stood there reading it twice, 3 times, my coffee going cold in my hand. Then I took a photo and walked out. It was a coffee shop bathroom, one of those single occupancy ones with a heavy lock, in a neighborhood I went to maybe once a month. Nothing special about that day, nothing that should have made me a subject of anything. I sat back down at my table and looked at the photo on my phone and tried to construct a rational explanation. Wrong number that happened to match mine. Coincidence. Someone else with the same digits in a different area code. I tried each one on and none of them fit comfortably. I called my sister that evening. She listened and said it was probably nothing, probably not even my number if I looked again, and I looked again while she was talking and it was absolutely my number, every digit. She suggested I change it. I said I'd had that number for 9 years, that changing it felt like letting something win. She said that was a strange way to think about a phone number on a bathroom wall. She wasn't wrong. I changed the number 3 days later. The following week I was in a different part of the city entirely, a bookstore I'd been meaning to visit. I used the restroom before leaving. Same careful block letters, same sharp black ink, this time on the tile above the sink. My new number. And below it, "She still doesn't know." I stood very still for what felt like a long time. I took another photo. I drove home and locked my door and sat on my couch and thought clearly and carefully about what this required. Someone had written my original number in a public bathroom. Someone had then obtained my new number, which I had given to perhaps 15 people, and written it somewhere else within days of the change. These 2 facts in proximity meant something specific and that something was not random. I went to the police the next morning. A detective named Paulson took my photos and my statement and asked the right questions. Had I recently ended a relationship? Was there anyone at work I'd had conflict with? Had I noticed anyone following me? I said no to all of it with enough certainty that she wrote it down rather than pushing. She said they'd check both locations for prints and asked me to report anything else immediately. 2 weeks of nothing. I started to breathe again, that cautious measured breathing you do when you're not sure the danger has passed but you're too tired to stay fully braced. I went back to my routines. I looked over my shoulder less. Then my phone rang from an unknown number and when I answered there was only silence, and in the background of that silence, barely audible, the sound of a busy coffee shop. Espresso machines. Murmured conversation. I hung up and called Detective Paulson and she traced the call to a prepaid phone that had already been discarded. She asked if I recognized the background sounds. I said I thought so. She asked where. I told her. They pulled the coffee shop's camera footage from the day of the original writing, working backward from the bathroom's location and the times I'd been there. On the second day of review they found something, a figure in the bathroom hallway, back to camera, hood up, spending about 4 minutes near the single occupancy door. Not conclusive, Paulson said. Not enough. They never identified who it was. No prints at either location. The prepaid phone was a dead end. After 2 months the case went quiet in the way cases go quiet when there's nothing left to pull. That was 14 months ago. Nothing has happened since, no more numbers, no more calls, no more careful block letters in public places. Paulson says that's common, that this kind of thing often stops as suddenly as it starts, that the person either lost interest or got nervous when they realized I'd gone to the police. I've thought about those words more than anything else. Not the number was just a vehicle. The words. Asterisk she doesn't know yet. She still doesn't know, asterisk what I was supposed to find out, and whether the point was for me to know it or simply to spend a long time afraid of knowing, I can't say. Maybe there was nothing to know and the fear was always the whole point. I've changed numbers again since then. New city, fresh start, only a handful of people have it. I still check bathroom walls. I found it because of the smell. Not a bad smell, something closer to lived in. Warm and human in a way that didn't fit the back of a closet in a house I'd only occupied for 6 weeks. I'd assumed it was the previous tenant's things, something sealed in. I'd assumed a lot of things in those first weeks that I've since stopped assuming. The closet was in the second bedroom I used as an office. Deep and narrow, with a light that flickered if you didn't hold the switch down long enough. I'd mostly used it to store boxes. It was only when reorganizing one afternoon that I noticed the back wall didn't sound right. I knocked on it the way you do without expecting anything, and it knocked back hollow. I stood in the half-dark with my knuckles still raised thinking about how thick a wall should be. The panel came away easily. Too easily, no paint seal, no resistance. Just a rectangle of drywall cut cleanly and fitted back into place, the edges worn smooth in a way that suggested it had been opened and closed many times. Behind it was a crawlspace roughly 4 feet high and 12 feet deep. I used my phone flashlight. I wish I hadn't. There was a sleeping bag, rolled out flat and recently used. The inside still held a compressed body shaped the way they do when they're warm. Beside it a plastic bin, a water bottle, a battery-powered lantern, and a paperback novel left face down to hold the page. I picked it up without thinking. A receipt was tucked inside as a bookmark, dated 11 days ago, a gas station 20 minutes from the house. I backed out of the closet and sat on the floor for a long time. 2 officers came and examined the space and asked whether I'd heard anything unusual, whether food had gone missing. I said no to all of it and then immediately wasn't sure. There were nights I'd heard what I thought was the house settling. Slow movement above the living room ceiling. I'd told myself it was pipes. They took the evidence, gave me a case number, and left me with the particular silence of a house you now understood differently. I called my landlord. It took 2 days to reach him. When I described what I'd found, he was quiet for a long moment and said he wasn't aware of any structural space in that area. He said it like a man choosing his words carefully. I asked about previous tenants. He said the house had been empty 4 months before I moved in and moved the conversation toward whether I wanted to terminate my lease. I should have said yes. Instead I stayed, sealed the panel with 3 screws, put a heavy box against the closet wall, and slept with my bedroom door locked. After a week I'd almost convinced myself it was a squatter from the vacancy period, long gone, nothing to do with me. Then I found the marks. Inside the panel, on the back face of the drywall, were tally marks cut in groups of 5. I counted them twice because the first count didn't seem right. 43. I thought about 4 months of vacancy and came up short. 43 was too many. And lower, near the base of the panel, 3 words scratched in uneven letters, asterisk still here. Waiting, asterisk. I was out of the house within the hour. I left most of my furniture. The landlord kept my deposit and I didn't argue because arguing meant continued contact and I wanted none. The police identified a man who had rented the property 2 tenancies before mine. Evicted for non-payment, made threats, then disappeared entirely. They believe he re-entered during the vacancy and built the space himself. They believe he may have still been using it after I moved in. The word they used was may. I've thought about that word often. About what the alternative would mean for those 6 weeks, for the sounds I dismissed, for the warm human smell I'd written off as someone else's old things. They never found him. I have a new apartment now, on the 3rd floor, and before I signed the lease I walked every room knocking on walls. Everything sounded solid. But I've never fully unpacked, and I don't think I'm going to. I want to be able to leave quickly if I need to. 6 weeks in that house made that instinct, and I've learned not to argue with it. I travel for work. Have for 11 years, regional sales, mostly mid-sized cities you fly into and out of without ever really seeing. Columbus, Baton Rouge, Spokane, Tucson. Hotel bars and conference rooms and rental cars that all smell the same. I tell you this because the traveling matters. Because the whole thing only becomes truly senseless when you understand how far apart these places were. The first time I saw him was in Pittsburgh, February. I was eating alone at a diner 2 blocks from my hotel and I looked up from my phone and he was standing on the sidewalk outside the window, looking directly at me. Middle-aged, average height, dark coat, unremarkable in every way that makes a face hard to describe after. What wasn't average was the stillness. People on sidewalks move, they shift weight, check phones, look around. He just stood there with no expression I could name. I held his gaze for a few seconds, looked down at my coffee, and when I looked up he was gone. I didn't think about it past that evening. 7 months later I was in Portland for a conference. Walking back to my hotel after dinner, something pulled my eyes left the way a sound does. He was standing at the far edge of a plaza, hands in his coat pockets. Same coat, I thought, then told myself that was impossible, that dark coats were everywhere. But the stillness. That specific quality of stillness, like a photograph of a person rather than a person. I took out my phone and opened the camera and by the time I raised it he was gone, not walking away, just no longer there. I called my wife that night and didn't mention it. Portland to Baton Rouge is roughly 2,000 miles. I was there in November and on the second afternoon I stepped out of an office building and he was across the street. Same coat. Same stillness. Same direct, expressionless watching. I crossed toward him, waited for a gap in traffic, and when I reached the other side there was nobody there. A woman walking a dog looked at me oddly. I stood on the empty pavement and felt something shift slightly under everything I understood about the world. I started keeping a log. Dates, cities, descriptions. I took it to a therapist who suggested I was experiencing stress-related pattern recognition, that the brain under pressure finds faces in neutral stimuli. I tried to believe her. Traveled less, slept better. By spring I'd almost filed it away as something that had happened and stopped. Then my wife and I went to Lisbon for our anniversary. Different continent, personal trip, nothing work-related. On our second evening we were having dinner at an outdoor table when my wife touched my hand and asked what I was looking at. I followed my own gaze back across the narrow street. He was standing between 2 parked cars, hands in his coat pockets, watching. I crossed the street in seconds. Empty. I looked both directions down the lane and found nothing. I told my wife everything that night, Pittsburgh, Portland, Baton Rouge, all of it. She listened seriously and without interrupting. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She also didn't tell me she believed me. We went home 2 days early. I hired a private investigator. I gave him my log and the one photograph I'd managed, blurred, distant, the figure barely distinguishable from shadow. 6 weeks later he called and said he'd found nothing. No matches. He said the photograph wasn't usable. He said if someone were genuinely following me across multiple continents, the resources required would be significant, and I should consider who might have both the motive and the means. I had no answer for that. I still don't. I haven't seen him in 14 months. I don't know if that's over or if it's a pause. I still travel for work. You can't stop living because of something you can't prove, but I sit with my back to walls in restaurants now and I notice every door when I enter a room. My wife says I seem better. I let her believe that because she's been patient and because there's no useful alternative. I still have the log on my phone. 39 entries, 3 countries, 9 cities. I've never deleted it. I tell myself that's just being careful. That if it starts again I'll know exactly when it began, and that knowing will matter somehow. I'm not sure I believe that. But I keep the log. I keep it because the alternative is pretending those sidewalks were empty, and I know what I saw standing on them, patient and still, watching in the specific way that something watches when it is not in any hurry at all.